Welcome to the Black Sparrow Media Internet Broadcast Network.
You are listening to Linux in the Ham Shack. LHS is a podcast about Linux, open source, and amateur radio for everyone. Now here are your hosts, Russ, K5TUX, Cheryl, W5MOO, and Bill, NE4RD.
Well, hello everybody, and welcome. You have tuned in to episode number 454 of Linux in the Ham Shack, the most terrific amateur radio podcast on the internet. And we welcome you into our deep dive episode for this, I guess we'll call it a fortnight because we only do deep dives every 2 weeks. But, of course, we have episodes much more frequently with that. And we hope you tune into all of them because hopefully they're all at least a little bit informational and at least mildly entertaining. But before we get into our topic for this evening, let's go ahead and introduce ourselves. For the on assignment Cheryl, W5MOO, I'm Russ, K5TUX.
And I'm Bill, NE4RD.
And Bill is going to be carrying this episode. So I hope you're ready. I hope you're pleasantly buzzing and can talk.
I'm definitely buzzed.
Oh, good. And you can talk at length about this topic because I have only experienced it for the last 2 hours or so. And I was trying to do something that it probably wasn't designed to do, and it didn't work. So let's talk about it. And, I don't know how we keep coming up to these topics that are Windows related on this Linux podcast of ours, but yeah, it's whatever. I didn't even check the license file. Is this open source?
I didn't even look either. That's a good thing for you to research while we're talking about the intro of it. But, I really thought that this episode was the whiskey and gin review episode because that's surely where the mind state of myself is in. Right now. But tonight we're going to be talking about bottles, and I don't know about your news feed, but my news feed has been hit at least twice with this particular application, which apparently is kind of an easy, it's sold as an easy way to get Windows applications to run on your Linux desktop computer, and at least it piqued my interest because I heard bottles. And it reminded me of the Codeweavers Linux term of bottles for their little instances of wine wrapping and stuff like that. And I thought, it was the same thing. And you did mention to me that, we've already talked about bottles a million times. And sure enough, that was the Codeweavers bottles because that's what they call them. But this is actually a totally separate application called Bottles. By itself, and you can find it at usebottles.com. It was just highlighted a couple times, probably on ItsFoss and a couple other news sites. So I'm not sure what has piqued everybody's interest in this. But that'll be the topic for tonight. And did you find a license file?
I did. GPL v3.
Okay, so it's GPL v3. So this is, and as I just closed everything out of my computer here, so we're going to talk quickly about the FAQ, which basically describes what Bottles is, which in theory should be different than everything else. But anyway, Bottles. What is Bottles? Bottles was born in 2017 as a personal need. So this is definitely from the FAQ, not my words. So all the I's are not me. It's actually the author that you can find on their website. Bottles was born in 2017 as a personal need. I needed a practical way to manage my wine prefixes. I hate the idea of using applications that install me with a version of wine for each application, and I decided to create this application based on the concept of using one or more wine prefixes as a container for all of my applications. In 2020, thanks to Valve, we have access to Proton, an optimized version of wine for gaming. Thanks also to other projects like DXVK, VK3D3D, of course, those are Vulkan drivers, eSync, FSync, and Shader compiler, and others, we can run a large set of video games designed for Windows on Linux. The idea of creating an environment based on Wine Prefix Manager comes from the standardization of dependencies and parameters necessary to run a game. On the other hand, we have software, often not up to date, that require environments and configurations different from those used in gaming, hence the idea of managing separate environments. So this should sound very familiar to you. If you've messed around with anything with Wine, and we just talked about Wine. They just released version 7.0, I believe, in the last couple weeks. We had that on the podcast as a flash topic, right, in our short topic show. So yeah, Wine is constantly being updated and always getting better and better. And of course, Wine is not an emulator. That's basically what Wine stands for, right?
but it still is. It's an emulator.
It's sort of an emulator per se.
It's like a shim. I like to use the word shim when we talk about software that runs other software. It's sort of the piece in between that makes it possible to do one thing on another thing. Yes. Yeah. So it allows you to run EXEs, MSIs, to do installers and everything else. And generally, in some cases, if your software is not too sophisticated, it runs beautifully. Minus a few little hiccups with the video graphics and stuff like that. But we know this has become more of a serious business, and we've been talking about it probably the last couple of years, ever since Steam started doing Proton and really hammering the Windows compatibility layer for that kind of stuff, and always kind of thinking about how Proton impacts Windows applications. And, possibly how that would impact a Windows application that is specifically for ham radio, because that's all we care about here, right, is ham radio. We don't play video games all day. No. that just doesn't happen. Oh, of course not.
So yeah, we only want to run ham radio deluxe or N1MM. Anyway. So all that was available to us previously was Wine natively. And one of my alternatives I listed here in the show notes, which you'll be able to find too, is, of course, the Wine Tricks, which you can find in Debian repos and just about everywhere nowadays. So it's an AUR and stuff like that, which allows you to also modify your Wine prefix. And when we're talking about staging your Wine prefix and Wine configuration. So when you set up Wine, I guess we should probably talk a little bit of generic information about Wine in general, because that would be generic. Wine is not an emulator. So it's a Windows emulator for Linux, basically, if we were to call it that. So it's just a shim that sits between the Linux kernel and Linux enumerated devices, and allows you to enumerate devices inside of a fake Windows layer on your computer. So you do have to map things like COM layer and stuff like that if you want COM devices. Some stuff is a direct pass-through, and most of your PCI devices will be pass-through and stuff like that. I've never really messed with high-end graphics devices, so I'm not sure exactly how that works, but you can read the facts and stuff like that for your specific need beyond the generic stuff. The Wine Tricks was a cool little app that allowed you to kind of pre-configure your Wine environment to have things like, I want .NET 4.8 installed. I need the 4.8 DLLs and stuff like that. So this would allow you to kind of go in and prefab your Wine environment with missing DLLs quite easily through a UI. It was really hard to do it straight through Wine because you'd have to kind of, that didn't install. Let me go out and I'll get the installer and then try to run the installer. And then you're like, oh no, I needed Mono and Gecko, and then I needed some fonts and stuff like that. So Wine Tricks sort of made a lot of that stuff easier. And so that used to be the original kind of way to play and stuff like that. And of course, Crossover Linux was the other option which kind of did the same thing. It kind of containerized your wine and wine tricks kind of stuff all into individual instances, which they called bottles. And this application is called bottles by itself, which basically is that same kind of thought of it's kind of like the wine and the wine configuration in each bottle. So you're basically creating a virtual environment, or a virtual machine, but I don't want to call it a virtual machine, but in theory, it kind of sort of is. It's a VM that contains the wine instance and the configuration, like I'm Windows 10 32-bit, I'm Windows 10 64-bit, or I'm Windows 10 64-bit with .NET 4.8 and .NET 3.51 for desktop, core .NET and stuff like that. Some of the missing DLLs and stuff like that you need for your environment, all kind of wrapped up into that little VM that then you would go and install your application that you want to install, whether that be like, Fortnite or, Minecraft or something like that. Of course, you can install Minecraft natively, so it doesn't matter, or Java wise. But so bottles here is kind of like that same abstraction, all pulled out by itself. And let me tell you a little bit about how to get it, because I first installed Manjaro because I'm an Arch guy, right? So I installed a Manjaro VM here at the house or the apartment in Ireland, and let me just keep up with the chat messages.
We're talking about Flatpaks, which suck.
Yeah, Flatpaks suck. Okay, anyway.
But you're going to tell us all about Flatpaks because that's their recommended installation technique. So.
Don't install it from Flatpak. No, I did not install it from Flatpak. So I installed Manjaro and I installed the actual package, AUR package for bottles because I always trust, human written packages. No, I'm just kidding. No, I installed the AUR package. I did not install the Flatpak. I don't think it's going to matter in this case. But anyway, so yeah, I saw the AUR package, and I have to say, Manjaro, I downloaded the Manjaro GNOME edition for a VM, and that thing runs so snappy in the VM, it's almost sick. I'm almost embarrassed that I might have to change my Garuda Linux install when I get back home because it runs so fast, and I don't know if it's just my laptop runs fast or not. But anyway. So I installed that, so I had that as my base, and then I installed bottles so I can get a nice clean install of bottles. So I do have it up here literally right now as I'm talking to you. And so once you install bottles, you're basically presented with an interface of adding your very first bottle. And it's very similar to Codeweavers. It's almost like creepy similar to Codeweavers. I almost wonder, chicken and egg type deal here. But yeah, so you come in, you actually add a new bottle. Inside of bottles, you're given, because it's particularly catering to gamers, they do have an option here. So like when you actually add a bottle, whether your bottle is specifically for gaming or for an application, or if you want to customize it. Now, if you don't know anything about doing wine completely, I would definitely steer away from customizing completely and stick with either application or gaming. It's not to say you're going to have success one way or the other, because generally with wine, it's still a hit and miss if you're not using an application that's inside of the wine database of accepted applications that tell you that, hey, this runs great, this runs not so great, or this runs, this is a platinum application. It runs just spectacularly. You can't even tell you're not inside of Windows. So you do get an option there to add what kind of application you're adding, and you choose the name. I'm just going to go ahead and do one right now as a test application, just so I can see all the stuff here for you. It's going to go ahead and create the bottle. So we're going to do an application with a fakey name. And it's like, it says, go make a sandwich because it's going to take a while. No, just kidding. It says, take a break. It might take a while. Generating bottle configuration. The wine config is being updated. The wine config is now updated. setting Windows version. And generally, it sets a Windows 64-bit as your version because, as we all know, Windows 32-bit is being phased out anyway, as all 32-bit OSs are being phased out. And it installs a bunch of other stuff to help the application, just some basic stuff, which includes the Vulkan drivers and everything else, just to make it play nicely with the rendering and whatnot, as well as installing all the fonts that you would typically see in Windows, including like Arial, Times New Roman, and Courier. I'm surprised it doesn't install Segway or whatever, which is actually the UI font.
Ego.
Seago or whatever it's called, yeah. And it takes a few seconds. You know, I'm in a VM, so it literally just finished right now. It says bottle created. At that point, you can go into your bottle and you get the bottle details. And you're presented with I guess we'd call it a sort of tabbed interface with the tab stuff being on your left. The first one being details and utilities, which basically has your name of your bottle and some utilities that you could possibly use, like wine config, if you want to go in and hard edit your wine config, browsing the C drive of your Windows bottle, command line, if you want to go in there, registry editor, debug, task manager, which you will use task manager quite often if you have problems with your application. An uninstaller, which it can actually be used as the installer for your application. So if you click that, it actually brings up something very familiar that you see in the add remove programs inside of your the older control panel of Windows 10. If you can still see the classic control panel, it's not the programs settings or apps and programs. What is it called? Apps and programs, apps and features. So inside of Windows 10, you have an apps and features thing that has taken over what the original control panel had as your add and remove programs. But here you can actually add and remove programs, including install applications that you've downloaded inside of Windows. You have the control panel as well, which you can see just some basic stuff, including the add remove programs. And here I see game controllers and internet settings. So I'm assuming that's for the archaic Internet Explorer settings that you used to see in the control panel. So all that's you're going to see in your details and utilities. Inside of the preferences, you'll have some of the more advanced stuff like the use DXVK, which of course is your DirectX 11 gaming and 3D application stuff. You have your VK D3D, which of course is your Vulkan Direct 3D performance stuff. That's going to be for your DirectX 12 games. Again, won't really help you too much with desktop applications, but it is enabled in those two applications, or at least in the application configuration. A couple other things. If you have the NVIDIA graphics card, you'll see the ability to enable the Vulkan for NVIDIA API. Some other stuff in here for fancy graphic stuff. Enable FSR for cutting edge upscaling. Should you have a high DPI desktop, ACO shader compiler in case you're doing some fancy gaming, discrete GPU, etc., etc. If you want to use a virtual desktop, meaning you want to use the bottle to pretend like it's inside of a windowed environment of a different resolution than that of your computer, and this stuff can get a little bit thick if you start to really get into the details of emulation. And I wouldn't really mess with anything unless you are experiencing issues. So at this point, you can pretty much leave everything as default. Some of the cool stuff, though, is on this page as we get down into it. I'm just going to maximize mine so I can scroll through it properly. You have mouse caption on full screen. Nobody cares about that. Shouldn't be a big deal unless your game is wigging out. But the nice part, if you get down to the system level inside of the preferences, you do have the ability to change the runner. And I think that's what makes this particular use of wine and establishing wine configuration kind of interesting, is the fact that you can actually change the runner here. And in my particular instance, I have the ability to switch to Cafe 7.2 or Syswine 7.1. But I believe you could also download a bunch of experimental ones, including using things like Lutris. So most Linux gamers are used to using Lutris and stuff like that, as well as Proton. You can bring in Proton version 7.2, 7.1, and so on and so forth. You can actually click to download those directly in your preferences. So that's kind of cool that you can try different runners for your virtual environment. As well as you go down, you have the ability to change your Vulkan drivers, your DX Vulkan drivers, your Direct3D Vulkan drivers, NVIDIA specific drivers. Windows version, you can change it to Windows 10, Windows 8.1. Oh my God, don't do it. Windows 8, don't do it. Windows 7. And then, of course, if you wanted to get into Windows 2008 R2 and Windows 2008 server versions, you could go ahead and, go off that cliff. And Windows XP is another option. And then if you're doing any overrides, which these overrides actually exist inside of the Wine Tricks, if you do that emulator, you could do some DLL overrides there as well. And you may have, if you've played around with it over the years, you may have seen a few instances where you've installed an app that needs a specific DLL override. It's not very common, but it's common enough that I've heard of it before. And a bunch of other little random things: bottles runtime, use game mode, use game scope, so on and so forth. Whether you want a HUD and stuff like that directly from the bottle. Let's go on to the dependencies. Dependencies is interesting because this is very similar to Wine Tricks, where you go and install a DLL set. Like if you need the .NET 4.7.2 or 4.8 or something like that, or if you need some Direct3D drivers, or VC, Microsoft Visual C++ runtime libraries, redistributable runtime libraries. A lot of games need that and stuff like that. That's where you're going to find that in this particular thing. The only part about this part and the application that I find kind of non-intuitive is the fact that they use a little diskette for the download install the dependency. It kind of feels like a save button to me, so it was not intuitive the first time I kind of looked at it. I guess from a user experience point of view, this would lose some points for doing that. Yeah, you're causing chop, huh?
Yeah, I am.
No problem. That's why we record both sides.
Yeah, exactly.
So you can pick out your dependencies if you happen to know them. Now, the thing that I noticed on bottles that at least code weavers used to take care of, like if you installed an application and its manifest, the MSI actually had the dependency information in it, it would go ahead and install everything automatically for you. In my particular test scenario, I was using an exe installer only because Microsoft sort of broke MSI installers for people distributing MSIs, distributing installers from applications that are not directly from Microsoft. So at least that's been my experience. I haven't been able to make an installer from Visual Studio either without any major success. So I'm not sure. I'm sure everybody's using a third-party installer software for their stuff, which kind of breaks being able to use MSIs to properly set up the installation of a piece of software with all its requirements. And that's really the point of the MSI, was to establish the dependencies, much like a deb package. Think of an MSI just like a deb package. A deb package says you need to have XYZ installed before I can even install the software. An MSI does exactly the same thing. But if you have like an exe installer, you can pretty much guarantee that it's not going to prompt you for anything specific. And in general, it's bad to have an exe installer in Windows because they can do all kinds of other stuff to your system at the same time. But anyway, dependencies, that's where you're going to find all that really cool stuff. Programs is another tab, and that's basically any programs that are found during your installation. So basically any programs that you add as an installed application should show up in programs, so you can quickly hit, basically run here. Versioning tab. This is a cool feature of bottles too, is the versioning, because you can try out certain things before you, think of it kind of like, a backed up file system or a ZFS or something like that, where it maintains the state of the file system prior to you making a change. So you can actually create a version that's like, okay, I'm going to try this change. I'm going to put this package on here and see if it explodes or not when I do this. And then if that package didn't work, you could just back up to the previous version and have your application in the state it was prior to making that addition. So that's kind of a cool feature, is versioning. Installers is another option or another tab here on the interface. And here's where you'll find some of the pre-configured installers that people have done in the community. So this is a nice part, even with the dependencies and the installers. These are all community-driven configuration scripts that basically are set up for bottles that allow you to pre-launch some stuff. Like inside the installers here, we see Blizzard Battle.net, Battle.net, EA Launcher, Epic Game Store, GOG Galaxy version 1, Origin, Steam, and Ubisoft Connect. So, I mean, gamers should be very familiar with that stuff. And as well, there's a task manager. And the task manager is very useful if you have a broken application like the ones I tested with this, and I had to kill the applications multiple times. Inside the task manager, you basically get a very similar thing you would see for any task manager. And at the top, you'll have a refresh and a kill button. And what's the other button? Notifications. Nobody cares about the notifications. So you have a notifications button as well. So that's basically the application itself. Other than that, I mean, it's just wine. I mean, in theory, it's just wine with a bunch of stuff strapped onto the front and back to make the configuration a little bit easier for you to do as a user. And I do have to tell you, I tried installing some stuff, and I didn't have much success. So don't be surprised if you don't have much success either. But let me just go ahead and go through some more of their FAQ before I go on to my experience with it. So here they have, why not just POL or Lutris? So if you don't know what POL is it's play on Linux. It's another kind of prefab environment for doing certain things on Linux, in a pre-configured way. And Lutris, of course, is exactly the same thing. It's kind of like, it's pre-configured. I want to be able to run, Starfighter 3 or whatever, some stupid game. Lutris has configurations that allow you to kind of go ahead and do that if someone has got it to work before. It is a community sourced project that allows you to do that stuff. But yeah, so here we go. Why not just play on Linux or Lutris? Because they are similar but different applications, I want to create environments that contain more applications and games where the wine version can be updated. Also, I want to be able to export my bottles, allowing easy sharing with or without applications. In Play on Linux and Lutris, we have the concept of this with this version of wine and these changes it works. In bottles, the concept is this is my wine bottle and I want to install this software. The goal with this version is also to integrate the system in the best possible way, being able to decide in a few bottles to run an exe and MSI file that have the control over it without having to open bottles for each operation. Bottles is close to what wine prefix means. Since version 0.2, it provides simplified method to generate environment-based bottles, and thanks to other tools, it simplifies the management, but nothing more. So essentially what he wants is, or what the author is trying to tell us, is that he wants a bottle to be able to contain more than just a single application, but be able to contain the configuration that allows you to run multiple applications within the same configuration. So it simplifies your setup. And it also makes it more portable, because this bottles allows you to import and export your configuration. Which should, in theory, make it easier for working applications to succeed within the environment in which you set up and export. So it does make it kind of cool. And I'm trying to remember. I have Collabra or Codeweavers on here as well, and I'm trying to remember if it Collabra. what is it called again? Code Weavers.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Code Weavers. What's the Code Weavers thing called again?
You talking about the OS or the crossover?
Sorry. Crossover. That's what I was talking about. My brain just froze for a second. Sorry.
Gotta cut back on all that alcohol over there. I know Ireland is tempting, but
oh my God, crossover. So yeah, crossover. I'm trying to remember if they can do an import and export. So yeah, you can import and export a bottle archive inside a crossover. So it's very similar to how crossover works. I was thinking it was very similar. But if you were to look at the two interfaces side by side, which for those of you in the chat room, I can definitely do that so you can see what both look like. Ignore my numlock off and the red line I just drew upon the screen because I'm so bad at nope, Control V, not V. There you go. So you can see what it looks like. So crossover has the applications and which application is being run under which bottle underneath of it. And then the bottles application, you actually just see the bottles first. So you go into the bottle to launch your application, but you have to select the bottle first. So it's a little different usage of the application. And for those of you listening on Memorex, you can always check in on the live chat channel for the screenshots later on. Just scroll back up to Sunday afternoon in the U.S. For those time slots where we actually record this. So yeah, you can see the application is slightly different from the launcher aspect of it. And as most of you that are watching live can now see that I've tried to play around with N1MM, my favorite Windows application for ham radio, and that's the only reason why we talk about Windows, unless we're just talking about Windows for fun. At least from my perspective in Windows and ham radio. Yeah, so there's a slight difference in the way they look and feel. In general, they're very similar in which they try to accomplish the same thing. So I'm going to highlight here from the FAQ again the features, and then I'll go into my experience. So yeah, the main features of bottles is it's a powerful, integrated, and written from scratch dependency manager based on community-driven and easy to expand repository. Lots of words. Fancy words, right? Dependency manager, community driven, sounds all fancy and stuff like that. So yeah, it's a crowdsourced way of sharing your configurations and everything else for setting up wine configs and an environment to successfully run an application. And in theory, that's all we care about in Linux is it's like I need application X to run just marvelously inside of Linux, and it only comes in Windows, but they don't make a Linux version, so how can I run it? So this is a great resource for doing that. Version control. Version control is easy to restore a bottle to state. Goodbye disasters is what they say. Version control, yeah, like I said, the version control is kind of a power feature, especially when you're in the experimental phase of trying to get an application to work. Do you need this driver? Do you need this set of .NET stuff? Do you need maybe an F audio? Do you need something installed besides just the application to get it running? Yeah, version control can be very powerful within the debugging phase of getting your application to run. Management based on pre-configured environments ready for gaming or software, with the most common dependencies pre-installed in an ad hoc configuration to immediately run a lot of software, or you can also configure your environment from scratch. So this is getting into those. So let me go back in here really quick. Yeah, so this gets into those installers. EA Launcher, your Epic Game Store, your GOG Galaxy, Origin, your Steam Launcher, your Ubisoft Connect. That stuff's kind of already pre-baked in there, so you can get you started and running really quick. Again, going to the repo, you can probably find some other things that people have committed and find out, how to get something running that maybe isn't totally mainstream that somebody else has kind of played with. So that's kind of cool. Full sandbox via Flatpak. Now, I did not install via Flatpak, so I'm not running that, so I can't exclaim to that. but you understand how Flatpak runs. We had a whole show on virtualized environments and how they sandbox pretty much the entire OS, so you don't mutate the OS outside of your package. It's a safety thing too. It's clean, so you don't impact any major system things with playing around with the applications. So yeah, if you want to use a Flatpak, use a Flatpak. Easy configure or full backup export import, also cloning. So we talked about the import and export, kind of a powerful feature. Automatically detect installed programs. No need to manually add to the program list. My experience with the N1MM is, your mileage may vary depending upon how you actually decided to install it. So don't expect that to always be the case. Sometimes you might actually have to restart the container or the bottle to notice those changes. 360-degree customization of the whole environment without having to go through wine config. If you've only ever done wine config through wine tricks, then this seems absolutely no different to you because it's sort of exposed in a more cleaner interface. If you've done wine config via the .config file inside of your .wine directory, which is very painful to do it manually, you'll really appreciate this. A fully integrated installers manager, also based on a community-driven repository. Again, having those pre-built setups is really good for gamers. And much, much more. Try Bottles to discover all the features we have designed to make it easier for you to run Windows software on Linux. And then I put in here as the end, which is kind of what my experience was with it. Will this work for N1MM Plus? Which in the past, I actually have had success running N1MM Plus inside of CodeWeavers for sure. I've definitely run it inside of CodeWeavers. Crossover Linux. Sorry. I keep failing on that one. I want to say Co-Linux, and I know that was something else. That's what happens when you've been playing around with Windows and Linux for too long. You run into stuff that sounds exactly the same. That's why we thought about bottles being exactly the same, because it sounds just like something else, like CodeWeavers.
And it kind of acts like it too.
Very similar, and so I'll give you the short answer, or the it doesn't work. Actually, it didn't work in crossover either for the latest version of N1MM Plus, but I haven't played with it in a long time because I really haven't contested using N1MM Plus in a while, although I really like it as a contest software. I had very little success. And for those of you that saw the screenshot, you can see that there are, 3 bottles with M1MM actually tied to it inside of my bottles installation. And there's 2 bottles set up inside of my crossover Linux installation for CodeWeavers. And they both experience exactly the same issues, which tells me that I'm missing something in both of them, which means that both of them possibly could work if I actually could figure out what was missing. But because both of them install the full installer without an issue, and both of them update the updater without issue. Although I will have to say that the CodeWeavers crossover Linux does prompt up the changelog file inside of Notepad or inside a text editor, where the bottles installation does not do that. And that is definitely a function issue inside of bottles. Bottles is not allowing the application to spawn up a text editor to allow you to see the release notes. So that's an issue inside of bottles. That is not inside of CodeWeavers. But it did not define success in the case of getting N1MM to actually run in either of them. Now, it could be because I'm in a virtual environment, but in general, that generally hasn't been an issue. in getting this stuff to work because I normally do all my tests inside of a virtual environment before I commit it to doing live disk stuff because I just don't like wasting time. So I think I still have a little bit of ways to go with playing with that for getting that to work. If I wanted to continue on that trip, I don't know. I don't know if I want to do that, but yeah, I did go through the exercise of trying it out. And as the screenshot shows, I actually did. This is real stuff, man. We really try this stuff out. And yeah. So right now I'd say it's a no-go for either one, which means it's a no-go straight for wine and stuff like that. But like, again, we just went through this wine change. So we're just into version 7.1 of wine. So there's changes there that have taken place. I'm not sure specifically which .NET libraries I need. I did install 4.8 on both, so they'd have the latest .NET Standard library, because I'm pretty certain that N1MM is using .NET Standard. It's a WinForms application, so it shouldn't be using anything like that. The errors I was seeing was related to audio, which I would assume is part of the audio recording stuff that's built into the application. And I wasn't quite sure where it would be seeing that, whether that'd be a Direct 3D or something like that for Direct Windows or Direct Sound setup. And I didn't go into looking at that, so I do apologize for not digging into that further. But if I do find out, then I will definitely pass that on in notes. But overall, I think experience-wise, Bottles provides a really good experience with kind of having everything integrated into one space. I like the way it does it as opposed to the way Codeweavers does it. I mean, of course, Codeweavers does cost you, $59, I think, for a license, which is not bad. I mean, really, for what it does, it does it quite well. I mean, this is... Bottles, of course, free for now until you have to buy support or something like that. But yeah, I really like the way it configured. It was pretty straightforward. You can, containerize your stuff very similarly, just kind of set them like a virtual box or something like that. You kind of just say, yeah, I want Windows 10. I want it to be 64-bit. I'm concerned about video games, or I'm concerned about applications. So it's really kind of a directed configuration, which is nice for the user experience of kind of setting up those kind of containers. Whether or not it'll work for your application is a whole nother game. But I thought it was interesting enough that I thought we could make a show about it. So that's why it's the topic tonight. So, yeah. So I guess now it's like, do you have any questions, Russ? Like, or did you play with it? You decided to play with it a little bit, didn't you?
I tried to play with it. I did not have much success. I was going at it from the Flatpak route, but I'm not sitting in front of a native. That.
Wow. Does that ring on your end?
Yeah. Hey, jeez. Okay. Enough of that. Yeah, I was doing it from the Flatpak, because I had a machine here that I could run it on, but I'm not native to it right now. So I was trying to get everything installed via the Flatpaks, which I did. I did the Spotify bottle, got that installed, but then I couldn't forward it across so I could actually see the output. Kept getting display errors. So apparently it's working, but I'd have to go on my Shack PC to actually itself, see it. Yeah. So, I mean, the way to get it installed and the way, even with the Flatpaks, I don't like Flatpaks, but at least it does make the installation pretty simple, straightforward. And I assume that if I actually walked over to my other computer here and started it up, it would work. But I don't know. It's another interesting not emulator technology, I guess. That's what we're calling all these.
That's what they call it, right?
Obviously, some of this code was borrowed from the Wine project. I think all this stuff sort of came out of that, and they're just trying to do things to make it easier to manage and make it better. but you still have all of those dependency issues because there's all those DLLs and everything that come with the Windows installers, and sometimes they don't get installed properly or get referenced properly, and that's why things like N1MM don't necessarily work. But yeah, I don't know. They'll keep getting better as time goes on, I'm sure.
Yeah, and I get that. I mean, it's very similar to doing it from scratch, except for this actually provides a user experience that allows some of that stuff to be easier to see. And I don't know if have you tried Winetricks in the past?
I have. When I've been using Wine, I have used Winetricks. Yes, it does tend to simplify things and make things work better, but it's still kind of hit or miss.
Yeah, because like when you go into Winetricks, you have to kind of first you launch Winetricks, and then you have to select which configuration you're using, and hopefully it's the default one because I've never tried it with multiple configurations. And then you have to go next and next, and then there's like there's kind of like a weird hierarchy of getting things in there for pulling the installers. I mean, it does work once you get used to using it. I can't remember the actual steps, but I remember there's like an extra weird step that's in the middle there to get to the DLL installers for doing like fonts and .NET configurations and stuff like that. And there was also something weird about the confirmations of those and whether or not those would work. You were exposed to the console level of that stuff, so it would show you like is W getting the file and whether it needed a EULA or something like that tagged at the response. You have to be really paying it quite a bit of attention when you're using Winetricks. And I noticed that with this going into the dependencies, I wasn't prompted for anything, which may or may not be valid in licensing terms to, hitting those EULAs as, yes, I accept the terms of the .NET license or I accept the terms of so and so forth. So, I mean, there might be some questions there in general terms of validity. But at least from the user experience side, it's way easier in doing those things. So that's kind of where I ended it. I kind of played. I got 3 different configurations and kind of is just going around in circles with both systems, and it didn't get any of them to. Well, they ran the application. I do take that back. Both of them actually ran the application with some random errors occurring with regards to audio, and then in one case it was bombing out on a structure type, and I think that was related to it being either 64-bit or 32-bit OS. So yeah, quite a bit of issues there with N1MM in general, but again, this is Windows software. It's not meant to be run on Linux, so if it runs at all, it's great. If it doesn't, then it's expected.
Right.
So, but yeah, that's Bottles in a nutshell. If you've been using Wine and Winetricks in the past, I think you will appreciate this application as a kind of your front end to all of that mess that is running Wine and Winetricks together. If you've been running something like Code Weavers and you've dropped the $59 to get a license for that, I don't think you would change that because I think that's a lifetime license. So no worries there. So yeah, I mean, it's definitely an option. It definitely has a better user experience than using Wine and Winetricks by itself. And I appreciate these kind of hobby projects that help kind of make the experience better for users to get involved in playing in the same area. And we've talked about using Wine for N1MM and other things in the past. So it always piques our interest every time it comes across my desk and I see that in my news feed. So definitely thought it was worthy to pass along to everybody else in this deep dive because it's something you could play with the many applications that are Windows only out there, CWGet, MTTY, numerous applications that hams use every day that could be run in Linux that just aren't available in Linux. So yeah, that's Bottles in a nutshell.
Bottles in a bottle.
Bottles in a bottle.
All right. Well, that's pretty cool. I'm going to play around with it some more. I'm going to actually have to get a machine here running an Arch distribution so I can actually try stuff from AUR because I don't actually have any of those right now. And the more I hear about the way it works, using Pac-Man and all that stuff and how Manjaro and some of the other distributions make using Arch a little more palatable to someone who's coming into it from the outside, like I would be. Not that I haven't used Arch before, but it's been a while. So
I could tell you right now, like on both Garuda and Manjaro, I have never used the command line to install a package.
Well, interesting. I'm not sure that's a
never.
I don't know that's a feature or not, but I guess maybe.
It's just interesting. It's an interesting paradigm for as weird as Arch used to be to get installed. It's kind of an uncomfortable topic in almost Linux from scratch in Gen 2 days to Arch that was very similar to where it is now. And it's like, yeah, I mean, out of all the distributions out there, this is the only one, well, besides the BSD one, I tried installing stuff from the I install it all from the add remove programs area, the software manager. So yeah, it's quite interesting.
All right, pretty cool. Well, it's definitely a project I'm going to keep looking at, and we hope this has been interesting enough to get people motivated to try it or something. And we'll see how it develops and might make running Windows software without using a full virtualization environment like, VMware or whatever, or VirtualBox easier to sort of just do instance-based like sandbox applications rather than having to have whole big environments. So, yeah, pretty cool.
Yeah. Interesting.
All right, very good. Well, we do have one bit of feedback that we're going to get to here before we roll on out. So let me go ahead and read this one. This came from Dan, KB6NU. It's a follow-up to our discussion we had a couple of episodes back about the ARRL grant program that's coming up, that he was the one who actually gave us the press release on. So apparently we messed something up. Big shocker there. But
well, no, I think we read the story from the ARRL, and I think you made a comment at the end after that in regards to this, which kind of conflated it, but that's okay.
Well, I wasn't conflating it. I was just wondering if they had anything to do with each other.
Right. Yeah. You were putting one and one together and they didn't actually equate to each other.
Right.
Yes. Yeah. And that's what Dan is explaining here. So go ahead.
Yeah. So he says, hi guys, in LHS episode 452, you included a story on the ARRL grants to amateur radio organizations, and there seemed to be some confusion as to whether this was the previously announced program that ARDC is funding. The answer to that is no. These grants are the vestiges of the old grant program and are not being funded by ARDC. The ARRL news story said as much. These are quite different from the programs that will be funded with ARDC money. For example, under eligibility and guidelines, the webpage describes the grant program notes. Grant requests for emergency communications equipment, facilities, or projects will not be considered. Grant applications for those projects will be allowed under the ARDC funded program. Awarded grants generally do not exceed $3,000. The ARDC funded program will award grants up to $25,000. There are other differences as well. The ARDC funded program won't actually get started for a few more months. As the ARRL is wont to do, they threw a wrench into their own works when the board ousted the ARRL Foundation president at their January board meeting and elected a new president. K5RAV, the previous president, was looking to get the program up and running by the end of March, but I bet it will take them, or the new guy, longer, if only because he has to get his feet on the ground first. ARRL politics, don't you just love it? 7-3 Dan, KB6NU. So yeah, politics gets in the way of everything.
Well, I can tell you a nonprofit group that doesn't do politics at all, and that's the K2BSA.
You just
Dan, me and you
can't
need to
go
talk
an episode without.
Yeah, I have to mention it. Don't I? Have to always mention it. And we're looking at Jamboree, National Jamboree 2023 coming up next year. So yeah, I might need some help in actually getting some additional funding for that project to make it even more successful than it has been in the past. And we have years and years of success out of it. So I'll definitely be calling you, Dan. So expect to hear from me.
Well, very good. That actually brings us down to the end of the show. So we hope you enjoyed listening. Hope there's a little bit of interesting information in here, and maybe a little bit of a good time too while you're spending time doing whatever it is you're doing while you listen to podcasts. We appreciate everybody listening, and we certainly appreciate all the folks who are with us in the live chat. We had Bill, N3AJ, Tony, K4XSS, Steve K7HBT, and we had KC5CNT as well. I don't have his name handy. But thanks everybody for being here, for listening to the show. And we hope you have a great week until the next one comes around. And we'll talk to you again then. This has been episode number 454 of Linux in the Ham Shack. And for the on assignment, Cheryl W5MOO, I'm Russ, K5TUX.
And I'm Bill, NE4RD 73.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Linux in the Ham Shack. LHS is a community-sponsored podcast. Our website is located at lhspodcast.info. You can support the podcast by visiting the LHS Patreon page at patreon.com/LHS podcast, or by using the contribute list on the homepage. We have a presence on Discord, Facebook, IRC, Twitter, and YouTube. You can also drop us an email at info@lhspodcast.info or leave us a voicemail at 1-909-LHS-SHOW. That's 1-909-547-7469. Visit the online LHS merchandise store at shop.lhspodcast.info for fun and fashionable show-themed merchandise. Until next time, remember to always heed your hedonism.